So we have a new game to talk about, and we're going to go into quite a bit of detail about this game because I want to cover why Lords of the Fallen 2023 was such a huge flop. This game actually peaked at 43,000 concurrent players, which isn't too bad, and that's on Steam alone. But now 7 months later, the game is sitting at just over 1,000 concurrent players, but that's with the game currently being 50% off, and the developers have also just recently released update 1.5, which should naturally bring at least a couple of thousand players to the game. Sometimes sales will do that on their own, sometimes major updates will do that on their own, but combining both with a 50% sale, and Lords of the Fallen 2023 still can't get any of its old player base back, can't bring new players in or anything of the sort. And I will admit, I didn't play this game for the longest amount of time. I didn't really feel it. I didn't enjoy the setup of the game or anything like that. But I will give the developers credit for releasing a co-op Souls-like game. And I also have to give a massive thank you to the devs, the publishers, and Lurkit for a key to play the game myself. And what I've done on top of that, because I haven't played much of the game myself, is I've done some research into the most common complaints to get a gauge of how other players are feeling as well. So Lords of the Fallen is a Souls-like. It was developed by Hexworks and published by CI Games. This game is a successor to the 2014 game of the exact same name, and the game was released for PS5, PC, and Series X and S on the 13th of October 2023. So when it comes to the gameplay side of it, it's a Souls-like, it's played in third person, and like its predecessor, you can use both melee and magic to defeat your enemies. On top of that, the game's campaign can be completed cooperatively with another player, and the game also features a PvP multiplayer mode. So at the beginning of the game, you create your own character, you customize them and everything like that. You change all their facial looks and all of their body size, muscle, whether you're going to go skinny or just fat. And you also choose from one of the 9 available character classes. And Lords of the Fallen is set in an interconnected world, one that's several times bigger than the game from 2014. In this game, 2 worlds are layered on top of each other. You've got the world of Axiom, which is the realm of the living, and you can use a lamp to access Umbral, which is the realm of the dead. And despite these 2 worlds sharing the same physical space, an inaccessible area in one realm may be reached by visiting the other. When the player dies, they are going to be transported to Umbral, in which they must return to Axiom and retrieve their lost XP. Because it works similar to games like Elden Ring, being a Souls-like, where in Elden Ring, you've got runes, you die, you lose them, you have to go back and obtain them. If you can't get them, they're gone forever. If you die again on your way to retrieve them, they are gone forever. However, when you die in the Umbral world or realm, you are going to respawn at your last save point and you lose any XP that hasn't been spent. Save points in this game are far and few in each region, but one thing that's good about the game is you can craft your own save points using materials that you collect from Umbral monsters. The thing is, from what I've heard about this feature, is that the materials are relatively rare. There's a small supply of them, so crafting your own save points doesn't happen too often. And then when it comes to the development and the release of the game, in December 2014, Thomas Gorp, I think that's their name, the executive producer of Lords of the Fallen, the original one from back in 2014, confirmed the development of a sequel, Lords of the Fallen 2. In May 2015, CI Games announced that the game would be released in 2017 and confirmed that Deck 13 Interactive, the lead developer of the first game, would not be involved in this one at all. Gorp then revealed in 2017 that the game spent 2 years on concept stage and that CI Games has significantly downsized the development team and reduced the scope of the game following the disappointing release of Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. CI Games then announced that Defiant Studios will lead the game's development in 2018 and that they would restart the game's development from scratch, so they had nothing to work with, they had to rebuild the entire game. However, CI Games then terminated the contract with Defiant only 1 year later, as it deemed their works on the game inadequate. CI Games then founded Hexworks in 2020, led by Saul Gascon, who's the executive producer, and Cesar Vatosu, who is the creative director, to work on the game. And Lords of the Fallen was developed using Unreal Engine 5. The game cost $66 million to develop, market, and produce the physical edition. The game was officially revealed by CI Games during Gamescom 2022 as The Lords of the Fallen. It was then rebranded as simply Lords of the Fallen in March 2023. Vertosu revealed that the game was once named Lords of the Fallen: The Dark Crusade, though the studio did drop this name for not reflecting the game's status as a reboot of the series. Hexworks had high ambitions for the game, with Vertosu adding that the studio set out to be the second reference after From Software for the Soulsborne genre by making Dark Souls 4.5. And the game was then released for PS5, PC and Series XS on the 13th of October 2023. And I'm going to say that's where this game kind of falls flat a little bit. It's always nice to have ambition, but when you set, like as the creative director for a video game, and for anyone else that's like quite high up in their industry of work, their line of work, setting a really ambitious ambition of being that Dark Souls 4.5, you have a lot of expectation to live up to. And when it comes to the reception of Lords of the Fallen 2023, it didn't do too good. It wasn't awful, but you have scores from the major publications as low as a 2 out of 5, so a 4 out of 10 from Eurogamer. You've then got a 5 from GameSpot, you've got a 7 from Games Radar and Hardcore Gamer. There's a couple of other 7s and stuff. When it comes to the Metacritic side of it, on the PS5, it got a 70. On the PC, it got a 75. The Xbox version did quite well. It got a 77. But then in terms of user scores, based on just over 950 user ratings, it got a 6.7. And then going over to the Steam reviews, overall it's got 20,700 reviews, sitting at 61% positive. And recent reviews, so within the last 30 days, it's got 375 of them, sitting at 60%. So it's a mixed sort of reception that the game's had. And when it comes to the sales of the game, Lords of the Fallen has sold over 1 million units, and it did that within the first 10 days of release. And you can tell the sales didn't really do too well after that, considering that the peak on release was like 43,000 players. 10 days later, that had dropped to 16,000. 10 days after, it went to like 7,000. And it's continued on a downward slope until you get to like where it is now sitting at about 1,300 players. But it did, like towards the middle of April, just before this update, it dropped to like 500 or 600. So yeah, this doubled its player count sort of on Steam since the update has released, update 1.5. But you would think there would be quite a few more players, considering it's 50% off and update 1.5 is a major update. So how exactly is Lords of the Fallen a huge flop? They sold 1 million copies, at least within the first 10 days. And I would say it's a huge flop because a Souls-like of this scale should be performing a lot better than it did. But not only that, by looking at the reviews, a lot of players have been put off this game. When you go through Steam and you see a massive thumbs up, you're like, okay, this is a decent game, I might pick it up. But if you see a game that's got that red thumbs down, or even the like tan sort of line, whatever you want to call it, to say that it's mixed, you're going to be a little bit more skeptical. So the game did perform really well out of the gate, but after that it just went downhill on a steady decline until it reached pretty much rock bottom. And for a game to be successful, for it to not be classed as a flop, it needs to continuously do well over a medium to long period of time. So when it comes to my experience with the game, some things that I've put down in my notes to kind of add to the end of the video is that they reached version 1.5 7 months after launch. And while they are boasting over 30 updates that have been accumulated to get to version 1.5, along with significant performance improvements and even custom difficulty modifiers, the game should never have been that bad to begin with, especially when they're charging £50 for it. And a lot of people, even after 1.5, are still complaining about performance issues. And again, it comes back to what we spoke about earlier in the video. When you are a creative director, when you're high up in a company, if you have an ambition, you put out a lot of expectations. So to say that it's a Dark Souls 4.5 and then to release a game that's really, really bad technically, there's a lot of features players want working differently, it kind of sets the future for that release. Especially when the publishers just basically cut off and ended a contract with developers a year after. And also when the original developers for the first game were not involved with this one. Like, you have to do well with a product you're going to release, especially charging £50 for it. But not only that, I think there's always going to be a sour taste in a player's mouth going to a Souls-like after you've experienced Elden Ring. Because naturally, I should be pulled into a game like this, considering I put over 500 hours into Elden Ring and loved every minute of it. But coming into this game, I didn't really enjoy it from the opening moments of the game itself. But not only that, they talk about the custom difficulty modifiers, and I'm guessing they've implemented these for players to make the game a little bit easier. But there isn't much in there that makes it easier or even more difficult. There's just a handful of modifiers and that's it. There's no like custom settings or anything like that. You've got like preset modifiers that you can enable or disable. For an example, you can turn on something called Iron Man, which is basically permadeath, making you start all over again if you die. There's also something that lets you pre-upgrade loot that you pick up, so your gear's upgraded from the moment you obtain it, along with not having the bonfire places disappear, but that's pretty much it. So it's more to make the game more difficult with Iron Man. And there's also something in there that makes your health be withered from every source of healing. So there are a couple of things to make it easier, there's a couple of things to make it more difficult, but the overall sort of scale of these modifiers doesn't do much for the game at all. As I said, there's only a handful of them in there anyway. But on top of these significant performance improvements, the custom difficulty modifiers, I will give them credit for some of the quality of life changes they've made. One of the big ones is they added an inventory expansion. They made your inventory bigger, which is what players crave in games like this. But not only that, you have new weapons and new quest lines, and it's quality of life, little improvements and bits of content added to the game like this that players will enjoy. So I have to give them credit for doing things like that. And then right at the beginning of the game, something that actually kind of put me off a lot is the cutscenes and the gameplay within the first hour or so have you dying to this enemy, which is called the Light Reaper, 3 times. This guy just kills you every time he sees you. And it feels like the story's all over the place. You lose your umbral lamp, but it magically turns up again, with absolutely no explanation. And then the rest of the story just seems to play out in kind of like a lore fashion, where it's done through memories and stuff. There's not like a direct story to this game, if that makes sense. Well, not from what I played anyway. And when it comes to that umbral lamp, it kind of feels as though that whole feature is a gimmick. It feels as though that is all that makes this game any different to a generic Souls-like. But something that was a little bit frustrating for me personally was the fact that they force you to use this in some areas of the game. There are some areas where you cannot make any progress unless you are in the Umbral realm. But when you're in there, you're told that the longer you are in the Umbral world, the more you're going to be hunted. And there are only certain areas you can go to in order to leave the Umbral world. So that means if you lose track of where you are, you want to spend a bit more time in there, you're going to be hunted, it's going to become more difficult. So the game basically punishes you for exploration, being lost and things like that. And it's a Souls-like. It doesn't explain where to go. It doesn't have a guide to show you exactly where you need to be. There is a lot of guessing work in some of the areas. The player has to figure all of that out. Souls-likes aren't designed to hold your hand like that. But when you're creating a Souls-like, having this umbral lamp that's going to punish you by making it sometimes unnecessarily more difficult the longer you spend in the Umbral world, it can be a little bit frustrating, especially because enemies in this game are just scattered around randomly, and they can hit you like an absolute truck. There are some enemies that are way tougher than others, there are some enemies that are annoying, there are some enemies that are cool. But because they are scattered around so randomly, sometimes when you lock onto enemies, you're going to focus on enemies that are in a completely different area to where you are trying to engage in combat. And it makes the combat that little bit less fluid than I would personally like it to be. But not only that, when you are fighting, if you are too close to a wall or something, you'll spend more time bouncing back off that wall than what you will damaging the enemies. You basically have to be in open space, in these small sort of narrow areas, in order to be effective in combat. And then we move on to a personal skill issue of mine. I don't know why I did this so much, but fuck me. The amount of times I was pressing X on my controller trying to attack. It's your right bumper for a light attack, it's your right trigger for a heavy. And I don't know why, but I kept pressing X, and then I realized I was wasting my healing, and I did it a ridiculous amount. But that's a positive for the game, because you're able to rebind your controls. So my personal skill issue actually brought out some positive within the game. And then there is something that I read, and that is that your partner in a co-op session doesn't share all of the loot. And not only that, if the host of the game fully dies, you get reset with absolutely no revive option like you have if the other player dies. So if you're the host, you die, both players are reset. If you're not the host in the game, you die, you can be revived. And I'm going to agree with that person and say that it should be shared loot for a start, and you should also, both players, have an option to revive. And then last but definitely not least is that the game looks good, and I will give it that. But the game was built in Unreal Engine 5, and I feel that that game engine can make any piece of shit look significantly better. So I don't know how much of an impact UE5 actually made to the game. Could it have looked really good on an older game engine? I'm not entirely sure, but regardless of UE5, the game does look really good. The combat is fun. You have your parrying, your dodging systems and things like that. But it just seems as though the best part of the game is probably that you've got the Umbral Lamp in there. You have two interconnected worlds. And I don't think that's enough to make this game stand out. Like, granted, it's done well, over 20,000 reviews on Steam alone, it's available on console as well. But I feel, especially in a time where Souls-likes are picking up a lot of traction, especially because of Elden Ring, I feel that Lords of the Fallen should have performed a lot better than it did. And because 1.5 is out and it's still sitting at mixed reviews, with no increase in review score based on recent reviews either, I believe Lords of the Fallen 2023 is a huge flop. It's unfortunate. I do quite enjoy the Souls-like genre, but I couldn't bring myself to like this game no matter what I tried. Because I tried playing the game normally, didn't really get on with it. I tried with some custom modifiers to have pre-upgraded loot and things like that, couldn't really get on with it. So maybe it's just a me problem. Maybe I just don't like this game. But that is my thoughts and everything on Lords of the Fallen 2023. A massive thank you again for the game key. And what we're going to do is leave that video there. Let me know your thoughts and stuff about this game in the comments, and I will see you guys on the next one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.